Another weekend of the Zionist blood feast and the destruction on the Palestinian people. The English language scientist journal The Lancet just published an article based on several researchers about the official death tolls in Gaza. It could be a severe underestimate, as collecting that data in Gaza has become extremely difficult, which means that the correct number of deaths might be closer to around 186,000 Palestinians killed in the last 9 months by the State of Israel. So today we have the pleasure of talking to Yamila Hussein Shannan, who's recently moved back to Palestine. So you were born in Colombia.
Yes.
And your parents, they left Palestine, or they flee Palestine in 48.
Correct.
Okay. So, and you also lived many years in the United States.
Mm-hmm.
How many years were you there?
23 years.
23 years. Okay. And now you moved back to Ramallah.
To Kobar. It's a small village near Ramallah.
Okay. So why did you move back?
I always think the question is the opposite. Why did I stay in the US for 23 years? Moving back has always, returning to Palestine is always the plan. Mm-hmm. I got distracted and stayed in the US a bit longer. I returned because that's what every Palestinian, I think, mm-hmm. Should have the right to. Mm-hmm. We have the right to. Not all of us are able to return. Mm-hmm. My mother spent 11 years in Zionist Israeli courts to make sure that we have the residency status. So I am one of the Palestinians that was able to exercise my right to return when I decided to return.
Mm-hmm. Can you tell me first of all a little bit about your work and your expertise?
I focus on the connection between oppression and education. Mm-hmm. Education, both schools and universities, but also education in the sense of community learning, of learning. Mm-hmm. So I'm interested in looking at how colonization happens both on the land mm-hmm. and on the people, mm-hmm. physically and mentally. I focus on the mental part. So I study and teach around what is it that we learn in order to accept oppression, mm-hmm. and what is it that we learn in order to fight for liberation. Mm-hmm. Colonization is a Western thing. Mm-hmm. Yeah. It's a Western idea and it's a Western exercise. Mm-hmm. And when I say Western, to be more specific, it's a European problem. Mm-hmm. It's a European, might we call it disease? Mm-hmm. That then spread all over the globe. Mm-hmm. So it like from my experience in Palestine, studying Palestine and living in Palestine, that's what allows me to understand colonization in a very real sense. So when I study colonization as a historical record, whether it's Algeria or India or what now is known the United States and Canada, New Zealand, Australia, all of these spaces, South Africa, all of these are European offensives against a people and their land. In Palestine, it's a form of settler colonialism. It's a colonialism that, for example, unlike India, where the British didn't have an explicit intention to move and settle there, in Palestine, from the beginning, the intention was to come from Europe into our land and eliminate us both physically, killing and murdering, and eliminate us as the indigenous people of the land.
Yeah.
So colonization rests on multiple components. At the heart of it is an economic component. It's colonization, I think, is instigated by racial capitalism. Capitalism is always a question of focuses on profit, on exploitation, on some scholars have called thingification, turning people and nature into things, things that can be bought and sold, things that can be eliminated, things that can be moved, things. It's total disregard of the humanity of the people and the total disrespect of nature, land, water, air. So we live in a world now where the idea of land as property to be bought and sold has become something that many of us think is normal. And up until recently, up until European attacks on the world in all its different forms, land was, people related to the land in a totally different paradigm. It was a relationship between humans and geography that produced a totally different kind of history. So in Palestine, the intention from the beginning was to eliminate the Arab people of Palestine in order to replace us with Europeans. In our case, religion, Judaism, was hijacked and used as a tool to manufacture who becomes the settler and who is allowed to settle the land. So in our case, it's an attack against Palestinian Muslims, Palestinian Christians, and Palestinian Jews who refused to go along with the Zionist project.
So yeah, and now you're talking about this by eliminating the Arab culture and religion in Palestine, but this also meant that the European colonizers of Palestine, they had a dilemma because they needed to fill up the land, so they needed to bring in a lot of Arab Jews as well, but that meant also eliminating their Arab culture and their Arab background and mentality, and try to Europeanize them into the Zionist project of creating this completely new identity.
That's what I mean by racial capitalism. Capitalism can only work by dividing people along lines of hierarchical groups that are grounded in white supremacy, which originates in and continues to live in Europe itself. And I say Europe in a more general sense. We know the European countries with blood on their hands in their colonial endeavor. Again, when you think about South Africa, you think about Australia, New Zealand, Turtle Island, you think about what's now known as Canada. All of this history is a history of some sort of deficiency thinking in the minds of European, and I should say mostly primarily men, mostly primarily wealthy or with the greed to become wealthy. So I guess the point I was trying to make is that it's not simply a matter of erasing the Arabness, the Arab culture of Arab Jews. It's also inventing and creating systems that keeps them as less than European Jews. So even those Arab Jews who came to Palestine to become part of the colonial project, to join the Israeli state as citizens, they continue to be treated as less than the white European men who came from Poland, from Ukraine, from the Balkans, from Britain, from France, from Portugal, etc. So it is ultimately a white supremacist European project that applies even to those who decide to join the colonial project.
Yeah, and some of the, like you saw, we've seen in Australia and New Zealand and United States, this colonial project, they kind of accept a certain part of the original people as long as they, assimilate in the way they want them to, and their religion and their culture is not a threat to the project anymore. But I think it seems like in this case, where they were assimilating the Arab Jews and stripping them of their culture and identity and making them be a part of the project. I don't know, in some cases you can say embracing it, but it seems like they didn't count on that the Palestinians, they so steadfastly kept to their religion and their culture and did not want to be a part of this project.
They actually expected it. They probably didn't think it was going to be this difficult, but in Zionist literature, in the written documents that the early Zionists wrote, they were fully aware that we are here, and they were fully aware that we would not accept, and they were fully aware that they would be going to have to genocide us. Yeah. They knew this. And I don't think the colonizer ever accepts the indigenous people. Like you take Turtle Island, what now is known as the United States, as an example, and you look at what the government continues to enact upon indigenous peoples in that land. So you rarely hear about indigenous women being disappeared in scaringly large numbers. You rarely hear about the role of the government in creating casinos and in exacerbating a problem of alcoholism. So there's never an acceptance. There is, however, strategic decisions to not always rely on genocide as the only strategy. So it's genocide in different forms. It continues. The colonizer can never accept us, the indigenous, because we will always, our existence reminds them that they're colonizers, that they're not of the land, they don't belong here. So when you think about Argentina, for example, I was at a conference many, many years ago, and this Argentinian scholar, who otherwise could talk a lot about theory, who basically told us, oh no, there was never indigenous people in Argentina. Not only is this scholar denying that there is still indigenous peoples in Argentina, the scholar is also denying that they ever existed. And that's not an individual singular thing. And that's where the role of education for me becomes very important in what is being taught in schools, how it's being taught, and what people are being trained to become. And this is a scholar who was at a conference where we were talking about oppression and liberation. So I'm not judging or assuming bad intentions on her part. It's just the rendering us invisible, both historically and in the present. So in Palestine, for example, they refuse to call us Palestinians. They've tried every single well, maybe they still have a few to try, but they call us Arabs. They divided us into Arabs and Druze and Bedouins. They call the Palestinians who stayed in the part of Palestine that was colonized since 1948. They call them Arab Israelis, a minority. Those of us who live in this part of Palestine, they've changed the name of the land and the name of the people. They refuse to accept that we are the people of Palestine.
Yeah.
And they insist on creating this mythology of religion being a factor in determining who lives here and who doesn't, through, like I said, co-opting the religion of Judaism and turning it into the basis for citizenship.
These days, there's a lot of talk. I would say, finally, the world has also realized that we need to talk about solution, what's going to come in the future. And so this one-state, two-state solution is something that is debated now. It was not debated for many years. Nobody took this one-state solution seriously for many years. I'm thinking this is something this one-state solution that will eventually create a free Palestine. What kind of model there will be in Palestine eventually is one thing, but another thing is also I'm thinking that it's hard to implement a one-state solution. Let's say this, like say freedom for everybody. So I'm thinking the goal to get there, instead of trying to implement and push politicians and have the UN implement a resolution that will say we have one-state solution, there is means that's already there. There's already been several resolutions made by the UN, which I believe is one of the strongest ones for a free Palestine is the right of return. Is this one of our means that actually pushing for resolutions, which is already there, which is already international law, something that the international society already agreed upon? Do you believe that one of the keys to bring back the Palestinians to Palestine, and actually in that way and from the back door create a one-state solution where there's peace and liberty and justice for all, is the right of return, that we uphold the international society on this on these resolutions they already made?
The talk about state is distracting. It's changing the topic. As indigenous people, our demand is not statehood. Our demand is decolonization. Once we decolonize, we will determine what we want. State might be one option, but there are many other options. For example, we might want to think of Greater Syria. We might want to think of some forms of opening borders with our neighboring countries and becoming a republic, or I don't know. We might want to think of, let's imagine the world without states. Let's imagine a world where there are no boundaries and no nationalities and no nation state. The nation state is a relatively recent invention in human history. It's not the only way for us to exist. So when people are talking about one or two states, I feel it's distracting, because it's as if you're telling me you have two options, either one or two states. And I'm saying, let's talk about statehood. Let's talk about the nation state in and of itself. And let's imagine a world with no borders. Let's imagine a world where people move freely from one space to the other as they choose. The second piece is, when we talk about one state or two state solution, it assumes as if colonization is a done deal and it's an okay done deal. And now we need to figure out how to make it work. no. In my mind, colonizers have to go. And if they want to stay, they want to stay within respect of the indigenous way of living, our relationship to the land. It's not even about being Arabs or being Muslims. That also becomes part of the whole state conversation. It boils down to, can you live on this land and respect nature and respect every living thing on this land, including human beings? Having said that, I move to the second big point is, what UN are we talking about? The same UN that legalized the colonization of my country? The same UN that continues to exist where 5 powerful countries have the veto, right? What UN, what resolutions? What difference does it make? What has the UN ever done to support actual liberation in Palestine? So yes, there are UN. So I think your question is sitting in a whole way of understanding the world that the last 9 months, for me, have allowed me permission to say, see, all of these are lies. There is no international body. There is, what's the point when the International Court of Justice, as they call it, says this is a genocide, and yet it continues months later? So what is the ICJ for? What is the ICC for when it issues warrants against the colonizers and against our resistance? What's that? So I personally feel like I think of the right to return to Palestine, not in the limitations of the so-called international law, which is in reality the colonizers' law. It's the UN is one of the ways through which Europe, and when I say Europe, I mean at this point we're talking about also Russia and China. It's one of the ways through which the world reorganized itself with the facade of some form of international body for justice, which you see it in the General Assembly. That has more semblance of what a UN should look like. But when it comes to making actual decisions for implementation, you have 5 countries, 5 governments deciding the fate of the world. The right to return to Palestine is a basic ethical, moral question.
So how do we implement? So how do we implement it if we don't try? If we don't try? If,
state of Israel.
Mm-hmm.
We accept that the Zionist project is a crime against humanity, and we dismantle it, and we accept and acknowledge that the crimes committed against Palestinians since 1948 by the State of Israel, because we haven't yet talked about the crimes committed by the British when they colonized us between the 2 world wars. We need to acknowledge the crimes and then find our way to justice.
And so how do we, if we cannot trust, trust international, so-called international law, and uphold the European Western leaders to the international law, how do we dismantle Israel?
Liberation projects are not the kind of projects that have a beginning and an end that's pre-planned and pre-designed. We don't always know where the next step is. We know we have a clear compass. So I don't feel that I need to have a project like, you know how NGOs have projects with outputs and inputs and all of that? Liberation is not that. Liberation is a very messy process. Mm-hmm. And it's very unpredictable. I don't know how eventually the Zionist state will be dismantled. It could be that the only way to dismantle the Zionist state is to dismantle the idea of nation states altogether. I mean, when Europe lived under kingdoms and they had kings and queens and palaces that ruled the country, then certain historical events led to an end to that system and the invention of the nation state. So historically speaking, I can imagine people who lived under kingdoms in Britain never imagining any other way of life. Yet here we are. The king has a particular role in Britain and Sweden and Spain, but it's no longer the ruling power ultimately, right? So I don't know exactly how history will unfold. I know that we make the road by walking. If we are clear that what we're talking about is justice, so we will continue fighting in that direction, and we will then interact with the history that human beings will be creating in the process.
Do you mean that is completely useless to put pressure on the politicians?
No. I think everything is important. Everything is necessary. Anybody who can do anything to stop the genocide in Palestine, in Sudan, in Haiti, in Congo, anything that anybody can do to stop it should be done.
And we can also see like similar cases like Palestine. Military pressure has been one of the tools actually to keep the wheels going, also with the military resistance. We see Afghanistan, we see Vietnam, we see Algeria. So I guess this is it's a part of the walk you're talking about as well.
Yes, I mean the one of my favorite poems lists everything that you might be against, right? I'm against this, I'm against that, I'm against anything you want. What am I supposed to do when you're burning my people in tents? What am I supposed to do when you are killing children, kidnapping children? Do you know how many thousands of Palestinian children are missing? Not all of them are necessarily under the rubble. Some of them have been kidnapped, stolen from Gaza. So again, for me, the main thing is stop the slaughter, stop the genocide, stop it, put an end to it. We can then continue talking. The idea that a people under genocide are supposed to have a very clear plan from A to Z is simply it's not a reality. The reality is when your hand is under the fire, you're going to do whatever it is you need to do to stop the burning of your hand. And sometimes the only thing that can be done is extinguishing the fire. So that's why for me, the discussions of one or two states feel distracting. The discussion is, how do we restore justice in Palestine?
So now you're living in the West Bank. How long you been there now in the West Bank?
It's gonna be 4 years soon.
Okay. So
and I continue teaching. I continue doing research. I continue my intellectual life. But most of the time I'm spending it in the land. I am working in the land. I am taking care of our olive groves. I am learning how to plant vegetables. I'm learning how to make compost. I'm learning how to be with the land. That's where most of my time is spent.
So how has life been for especially the last 9 months? Did you experience also the slow genocide going on in the West Bank yourself, or people around you?
It's the only thing I've ever experienced in Palestine. A few years back in the United States, a group of freedom fighters got together and drafted a vision for Black liberation in the United States. And in that vision, they talked about genocide in Palestine. And 10 years ago, the political atmosphere was such that they were blasted for using the word genocide, which was, I think, very accurate. If you think about colonization and if you think about the history of Palestine, and I keep saying since 1948 because our direct genocider is the Israeli state since 1948, but it doesn't mean that it started then. I mean, like I keep saying, the British government has yet to be held accountable for the crimes it committed in Palestine, particularly between the two world wars. So yes, there's always been a slow genocide in Palestine, sometimes faster, sometimes slower, sometimes more condensed in certain geographic areas than others. The last 9 months, they've been the hardest, almost impossible, I think, for all Palestinians everywhere. A big part of it is the unveiling of the illusion of the UN, the unveiling of the illusion of the state as protector, the unveiling, the exposure of all the lies that held the 20th century together. And knowing that all of these are lies does not automatically mean that we have a clear vision for what should be. We know this is not okay. This cannot continue. In the process of liberation, we will be identifying then what. But when these last 9 months, even though what we're going through in this part of Palestine is not as atrocious as what's being done against our people in Gaza, we're still, I mean, in the past 9 months, the Israeli government state has stolen more Palestinian land than ever since the Oslo Agreement, since 1993. The number of people that have been kidnapped and put in jails and prisons, that have been put in concentration camps. You hear about Palestinian men being released from jail and then shot in the back of their heads while still shackled. In Jenin and Tulkarem, they are bombing, not in the same scale like in Gaza, but they're not simply using snipers to kill and maim and murder. They're also bombing. They're also destroying infrastructure. They're also punishing us through water and electricity, particularly water. Now we're feeling it very clearly in my village. Everybody, you go on Facebook and to hear what people in my village are saying, everybody's saying, we don't have water. When is the water gonna arrive our village? So it's using nature against us as a form of punishment. So now the amounts of water that we have access to are an indication of what's about to come. I don't know how things will unfold in this part of Palestine, but I know that in Jerusalem, for example, the way the elimination of the indigenous people in Jerusalem has been ongoing, has also a very particular aspect in terms of managing questions of residency, denying people the right to continue living in Jerusalem because they were away for a few years. So they have been employing multiple and sometimes slightly different tactics all over Palestine. When you think about the Palestinians who stayed in the land in what became known as Israel, they are going through a process that is different than the way we are being oppressed and pushed out of the land. So all over Palestine, there are multiple mechanisms for how colonialism is trying to establish itself as the rule of the land, uncontested. So our resistance has been ongoing since day one and has evolved throughout history. So in 1987, when I was a young woman, we resisted with stones and burning tires. Our resistance now has taken different forms, just like colonization continues to take different forms. So my generation in 1987, it wasn't, the colonizer did not carpet bomb whole cities, did not burn us in our tents in the numbers and the scale that we are seeing today. So our resistance is continuously engaged in and with the different machineries that the colonizer invents and enacts.
It's unbelievable in the sense that if you took Gaza aside and only what's happening in the West Bank, that this is not where there's no Hamas and so on, and this is not enough for the world to react. It's like nobody talks really about what's happening in the West Bank, because everybody's focused on Gaza in the West, and they still uphold this righteous war of Israel to kill Hamas. But this is what this is, of course, this is the excuse. And so if you only took the West Bank alone, what's happening there, it's unbelievable. And you take, for example, what's just happened lately, the so-called Israeli higher planning council that's just approved the new settlements in Palestine, in the West Bank, and nobody's saying anything about it. Nobody's talking about it. This is the so-called democracy,
Yeah.
And it's unbelievable. So yeah, it's you like what people also open their eyes to here in the West is like people understand now. People who were not maybe into the Palestinian cause before, they understand now that Palestine is just another symptom of the Western colonization project, and it hasn't stopped. It did not stop some years back or before the Second World War or after the Second World War. Like people saying, it's just continuing. It's the same world order.
Well, I mean, some argue, and I see the logic in it, that the Second World War never ended. Because of Palestine. Because when you look at the world through the lens of Palestine, in order for them to wrap that global war, to wrap it up, they brought it to Palestine. They condensed it in Palestine. So you see, for example, the strong, they call them powerful countries of the world came running to participate in the genocide from day one. It's not simply because they want to support the Zionist project. It's also because they are protecting what keeps them powerful. Palestine became the space where the powers of the world condense their. They try to cement imperialism through Palestine. Now, when you think about Palestine and you think about currently at this moment, Congo, Haiti, Sudan, Yemen, you start seeing the connections of how it works. It's never been about Hamas. It's always been about our resistance. And it's always been the intention to murder us, even if we did not resist.
Yeah, and the reason why they are successful is that they, through many decades now, successfully implemented this deep, deep racism against Muslims. And that's so that you don't have the majority of the population going against what the governments are doing, because they have the fear of Islam and the Muslims has been implemented so deeply in the societies now in Europe and in the United States that people accept the killings of Palestinians. And in their eyes, even a Christian Palestinian I don't think they can cape it. I think a Christian Palestinian is like a Muslim Christian in their view. The Palestinians are all Muslims, even though they're Christians. And this is why the society are not putting the politicians they're not being held responsible for what they're doing. They can do whatever they want when it comes to Palestinians.
Definitely, I mean, if you think about the past 30 some years since the collapse of what used to be the Soviet Union, and you look at which countries have been attacked and which nations, which peoples have been genocided. I mean, you look at it, it's, Iraq, Syria, Afghanistan, Sudan, Yemen, all, the majority Muslims. At the same time, Europe continues to hate Jews. Europe continues to hate anybody who's not white European. And it's not a hatred in the sense of emotional thing. It's hatred in the sense of constant attempts at dehumanization, constant attempts at elimination, constant attempts at exploitation. Again, it's what some Black scholars have called thingification.
And then another ironical thing, just to mention here towards the end, is that here in Europe we are seeing on the broad spectrum that it's becoming the political parties who's against the refugees are becoming more and more popular, and they're gaining more and more power. And part of their politics is trying to make the refugees leave Europe. They want the refugees, especially the refugees with a Muslim background, to leave Europe and send them back to their countries. Except when it comes to Palestinian refugees. This is the dilemma. They don't want us to go back because it will interfere with the Zionist project. But Yamila, so please.
I was reading an article many years ago, and it struck me, one of the comments in the article, in a demonstration in France 30, 40, maybe more years ago. Somebody had a sign, an Algerian person held a sign that said, "We are here because you were there." In other words, when we talk about immigration, exactly to your point, we don't problematize the colonizer who is invading. We only problematize the people who are trying to survive. And that, for me, is one of the ways that I think that the very same concept of a nation state and boundaries. I mean, you look at the northern parts of Palestine and you look at South Lebanon, geographically, it is the same land. There's an artificial, politically constructed border there.
I agree. I hope also this is the big fight, how to reunite the Middle East and the whole Arab world, because we have so much in common. A world without, at least a Middle East or an Arabia, an Arab world without borders. Maybe we can start there.
Yeah, but also think about it. It might also start in other parts of the world. If you pay attention to what's happening in what now is known as South America, if you pay attention to what's happening in different other parts of the world, part of what I try to invite my students to think about the world, not only limited to Europe and Europe's obsessions, to also think of the world as the world, to imagine all the continents, to imagine all the people, to decenter Europe from our discussions. Our imagination can become more vast, right? So it could be that we are the ones who lead the way. It could be that the leadership will come from elsewhere, right? So yes, I do think that there can never be any dream of peace on earth as long as Palestine is not free.
No. And
I also think that the liberation of the world from colonization might not start in Palestine. And it could be that there are other places that are more ready to take that role. We need to be thinking about the world, the globe, not only the what Europe thinks matters.
I agree, and I hope the world will come there. But I must say I'm pessimistic. I have hope for Palestine. I hope for the Palestinian people, and I believe that we can be liberated. But for the whole world, I am more skeptical because I know also the dark nature of man, and it was always. And this is an ongoing battle, an eternal battle. And I think first of all, liberating Palestine is also a part of that. Is a big part of that is also liberating your own soul. So the struggle for Palestine is also a struggle for oneself and to liberate ourselves as human beings.
And a liberated Palestine that doesn't account for what's happening in Congo and Haiti and Sudan and Yemen, it's not a liberated Palestine. For Palestine to be free, we need to also be talking about all forms of racism and all forms of exploitation and all aspects of colonization. As long as indigenous women in Turtle Island are disappearing in these numbers, and they are really not talked about.
No, and
as long as children are being starved to death in different parts of the world, the liberation of Palestine, for me, embodies the notion of a just world. When Palestine is free, Hawaii will also be free, will be decolonized. Puerto Rico will also be free. Indigenous women will be safe. Indigenous men will be taken care of as they need. Sudan, Congo, Yemen, South Africa will continue in that road. It has to be a global vision, even when we are working from our particular spaces.
I agree. Thank you so much, Yamila, and
Sure.
and for your deep and sharp and insight and emotional insight. So I would really look forward to this conversation, and I hope we can maybe have a talk again in the near future. I would love to get an update what's happening in the West Bank, and I might even see you there.
Oh, that would be lovely.
So I would love to come soon, and if I can come in, we'll see. So thank you so much. Thank you so much. Inshallah.
Sure.
Thank you so much.
Sure.
So
Take
thank you.
care.
Thank you.